Alright, Shalom, back again, family. Alright, peace to y'all. We're gonna jump right back into it, okay? This time we're gonna be reading out of the book of 4th Maccabees, right? And this book, you know, it's always been included in the original Bible compilation. Started out in the Septuagint, right? Now this edition I have here is by James H. Charlesworth, Volume 2 in the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. Right? Now you can, I'm not going to read the preface, but, you know, I'd encourage you all to read it whenever you get the chance, just to get a little back history and overview of what it's about, and as well as its inclusion in the Bible. But anyways, we're just going to jump right into it, right? All right. Okay, this is the 4th book of Maccabees. And it starts out the author's definition of his task. First, chapter 1, verse 1. Let me get comfy, you know. Get right real quick. My bad. Excuse me, yo. Excuse me. Stay hydrated, you know what I mean? Alright, keep your ears open, keep your heart open. Let's go. Highly philosophical is the subject I propose to discuss, namely, whether devout reason is absolute master of the passions, and I would strictly counsel you to give earnest attention to my philosophical exposition. The subject is an indispensable branch of knowledge, but it also includes a eulogy of the greatest virtues, by which I mean, of course, prudence. If reason is shown to be master of the passions that hinder temperance, namely gluttony and lust, it is also demonstrated that it is lord of the passions that impede justice, such as malice, and over the passions that impede courage, such as rage and fear and pain. How then, some might ask, if reason is master of the passions, does it not control forgetfulness and ignorance? The question is absurd. It is not over its own inherent defects that reason is master, but over the passions that are opposed to justice and courage and temperance, and master over these not in such a way as to eradicate them, but to keep men from surrendering to them. I could prove to you from many and varied sources that reason is absolute master of the passions, but far the best example I could furnish is the heroism of those who died for virtue's sake, namely Eleazar and the 7 brothers and their mother, taking no account at all of the sufferings that brought them to their death. They all prove that reason is lord of the passions. I might indeed eulogize for their virtues those men who at this season of the year died together with their mother for goodness sake, but I would rather congratulate them on the distinctions they have attained. Not only was all mankind stirred to wonder by their courage and fortitude, but even their own torturers, and so they became responsible for the downfall of the tyranny which beset our nation, overcoming the tyrant by their fortitude, so that through them their own land was purified. But I shall have opportunity presently to speak on this matter. Meanwhile I shall begin, as I am accustomed to do, with the general theory, and then I shall return to their story, giving glory to the Most High, the All-Wise. Alright, Supremacy of Reason, Chapter 2. The subject of discussion then is whether reason is absolute master of the passions, but we have to define what reason is and what passion is, how many forms of passion there are, and whether reason is lord over them all. Reason, I suggest, is the mind making a deliberate choice of the life of wisdom. Wisdom, I submit, is knowledge of things divine and human and of their causes. And this wisdom, I assume, is the culture we acquire from the law, through which we learn the things of God reverently and the things of men to our worldly advantage. The forms of wisdom consist of prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. Of all these, prudence is the most authoritative, for it is through For it is through it that reason controls the passions. Of the passions, the two all-embracing kinds are pleasure and pain, and each of these inheres in the body as well as the soul. A large return of passions attends upon both pleasure and pain. Before pleasure comes desire, and after pleasure comes joy. Before pain comes fear, and after pain comes sorrow. Anger is a passion involving both pleasure and pain. If one reflects on how it has touched him, included under pleasure also is the malicious moral temper, which expresses itself in the most widely varied ways of all the passions, those of the soul being pretentiousness and avarice, and seeking the limelight, and contentiousness and backbiting, those of the body being a voracious appetite for all kinds of food, and gluttony and gormandizing in private, and eating like crazy. Now pleasure and pain being, as it were, two branches stemming from body and soul, there are many offshoots of these passions. Each of these reason, the master gardener, purges thoroughly, and prunes and binds up, and waters and irrigates all around, and so domesticates the wild undergrowth of inclinations and passions. For reason is the guide of the virtues and the supreme master of the passions. Observe in the first place how, in regard to the things that hinder temperance, reason is complete master of the passions. Temperance, as I understand it, is control over desires, and of desires some relate to the soul and others to the body, over both of which reason obviously holds sway. When we are attracted to forbidden foods, how do we come to reject the pleasures to be gained from them? Is it not because reason has the power to control the appetites? And reason, we know the fear of God is wisdom, right? That keeps you straight. You're scared to death that the Most High will destroy you, so you don't even mess around, right? I believe it is, accordingly, when we crave seafood or fowl or the meat of four-legged beasts or any sort of food at all that is forbidden to us under the law, it is through the mastery of reason that we abstain. For the proclivities of our appetites are restrained and held in check by the prudent mind, and all the motions of the body are muzzled by reason. The law's compatibility with reason. Chapter 2, it says, what wonder then if the desires of the soul for union with beauty are deprived of their force? It is on these very grounds that the temperate Joseph is praised, because through his own rational faculty he gained mastery over his sensuality. Though a young man at the prime of his sexual desire, he quenched the burning ardor of his passions, and not only over the fiery passion of sexual desires does reason evidently exercise control, but over all desire. Right, and we read that in the Testament of Joseph last week. So if you missed that, go back and read and watch that video. Right, just go through my videos. It's called the Testament of Joseph, and you can see how the Egyptian woman, who was married and said she would like kill her own husband just to lay with this man Joseph. He overcame all that desire. Right. Anyways, verse 5. For the law says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or anything that is your neighbor's. Surely then, since the law tells us not to covet, I should the much more readily persuade you that reason has the power to control the desires. It has that power, indeed, over the passions which hinder justice. For how else could a man who habitually gormandizes in private, or is gluttonous, or is a drunkard, be taught to change his ways if reason were not obviously lord over the passions? As soon as a man conducts himself according to the law, then even if he be avaricious, he reverses his own natural tendency and lends to the needy without interest, canceling the debt with the coming of the 7-year period. And if a man be niggardly, means to take back things, doesn't mean black here, people. But if a man be niggardly, he is brought under the rule of the law through reason, so that he neither gleans over the stubble in his harvest fields, nor picks the last grapes from his vines. And in other cases also we can perceive that reason is master of the passions. For the law takes precedence over benevolence to parents and will not betray virtue for their sake. It takes precedence over love for a wife and reproves her for transgression. It overrules love for children and punishes them for wrongdoing. And it exercises its authority over intimate relationships with friends and rebukes them for evil. Nor should you think it is paradoxical that reason is able through the law to master enmity, so that a man will not cut down the trees in his enemy's orchard, and will save the property of his adversary from martyrs and raise up his beast when it has fallen. Reason is also obviously in control of the more aggressive passions, ambition, vanity, false pretension, pride, and backbiting. All these malicious passions the temperate mind rejects, as it does even with anger, since over to it has the mastery. When Moses grew angry with Dathan and Abiram, instead of venting his anger upon them, he moderated it by reason. For the temperate mind, as I have said, has the power to triumph over the passions, to transform some of them and quell others. How else did our surprisingly wise father Jacob blame Simeon and Levi and their friends for slaughtering the whole tribe of the Shechemites without any appeal to reason, and declare, "Accursed be their rage"? Surely if reason could not control anger, he would not have spoken in this way. God fashioned man. He implanted in him his passions and inclinations. At the same time, enthroned the intellect amid the senses as the sacred guide over all. To the intellect he gave the law. And if a man lives his life by the law, he shall reign over a kingdom that is temperate and just and good and brave. Reason's conquest of the passions, as in King David. How is it then, someone may object, that if reason is master over the passions, it does not control forgetfulness and ignorance? The argument is absolutely ludicrous, for reason is clearly not sovereign over its own inherent inclinations, but over those of the body. For instance, none of you can eradicate desire, but reason can ensure that you do not become enslaved to desire. Anger none of you can eradicate from his soul, but reason can help you resist anger. None of you can eradicate malice, but reason may be your ally in not allowing you to be overwhelmed by malice. For reason is not the uprooter of the passions, but their antagonist. This becomes even clearer. In fact, when we consider the case of King David's thirst, when David had been fighting against the Philistines throughout the entire day, and in company with the soldiers of his own people had killed many of them, with the evening he came to the royal tent all perspiring and very tired, and around it was encamped the whole army of our ancestors. While all the rest took to dining, the king, parched with thirst as he was, and though he had plentiful springs of water, was unable to slake his thirst from them. An unreasonable desire for the water in the enemy's territory racked him and inflamed him and unnerved him and burned him up. When his bodyguard grumbled at the king's desire, 2 stalwart young soldiers who respected it equipped themselves fully with armor, and taking a pitcher scaled the enemy's ramparts, escaping the notice of the sentries at the gate. They went through the whole enemy encampment on the search. On finding the spring, they boldly drew from it and carried the drink to the king. But he, though still burning with thirst, considered that a drink reckoned as equivalent to blood presented a dreadful danger to his soul. Accordingly, he set reason against desire and poured out the drink as a libation to God. For the temperate mind is able to conquer the constraints of the passions and to quench the flames of frenzied desire, to overcome the pains of the body, however extreme, and through nobility of reason to reject contemptuously the whole domination of the passions. Okay, I'm gonna skip this next chapter. All right, but okay, and then he gets to his point here about how reason is master, right? Because they reasoned in themselves the fear of God and knew that, there's more to life, right? So look, Antiochus' savage measures against the Jews. On the death of King Seleucus, his son Antiochus Epiphanes, an arrogant and terrible man, succeeded to the rule. He deposed Ananias from the high priesthood and appointed his brother Jason as high priest, on his agreeing to pay him annually 3,660 talents if he would confer the office on him. So Antiochus commissioned Jason to serve as high priest and rule over the people. In total disregard for the law, Jason changed the nation's whole mode of life and its polity. Not only did he lay out a gymnasium on the citadel of our native land, but he also rescinded the service of the temple. At this, the divine justice was angered and brought Antiochus himself to war against them. When he was at war with Ptolemy in Egypt, and heard that the people of Jerusalem took the greatest delight in a widespread rumor about his death, he promptly marched against them, and when he had ravaged them, he issued a decree to the effect that all who were seen to conform to their ancestral law must die. And when by his decrees he failed completely to destroy our people's respect for the law, and observed that all his threats and penalties were entirely discounted, even to the extent that women who knew in advance what was in store for them were hurled headlong from the walls with their infants, because they had their children circumcised. When, I say, his decrees were despised by the people, he himself sought to force each individual in the nation under torture to partake of unclean food and to abjure Judaism. Antiochus' encounter with Eleazar 5. And so the tyrant Antiochus took his seat with his counselors on a certain high place, with his fully armed troops mustered around him, and he ordered his guards to drag along every single one of the Hebrews and compel them to eat swine's flesh and food sacrificed to idols. Whoever refused to eat the defiled food was to be tortured and put to death. Many were violently snatched away, and the first of the herd to be brought before Antiochus was a man called Eleazar, of priestly stock, expert in the law and advanced in age, and known to many of the tyrant's entourage for his philosophy. When Antiochus saw him, he said, Before I have the tortures begun on you, old man, I would advise you to eat of the swine's flesh and save yourself. I respect your age and your gray hairs, although to have had them for so long and still cling to the religion of the Jews makes you anything but a philosopher in my eyes. Why should you abhor eating the excellent meat of this animal which nature has freely bestowed on us? Surely it is a sheer folly not to enjoy harmless pleasures, and it is wrong to spurn nature's good gifts. But in my judgment, it will be greater folly still if you indulge in idle conceits about truth and continue to defy me to your own cost and suffering. Will you not awaken from your preposterous philosophy? Abandon your nonsensical calculations, assume a frame of mind to match your years, and accept the true philosophy of expediency. Bow to my benevolent advice and have pity on your own old age. Consider this also, that even if there is some power that watches over this religion of yours, it would pardon you for any transgression committed under compulsion. When the tyrant had in this way urged him on the eating of food forbidden by the law, Eleazar asked permission to speak. And on receiving authority to do so, he began to speak out publicly as follows. We, Antiochus, who firmly believe that we must lead our lives in accordance with the divine law, consider that no compulsion laid on us is mighty enough to overcome our own willing obedience to the law. Therefore, under no circumstances, whatever do we ever deem it right to transgress the law. And even if our law was not, as you suggest, in truth divine, we only reckoned it to be divine, it would still in fact be impossible for us to ruin our reputation for piety. Accordingly, you must not regard it as a minor sin for us to eat unclean food. Minor sins are just as weighty as great sins, for in each case the law is despised. You mock at our philosophy as though our living under it were contrary to reason. On the other hand, it teaches us temperance, so that we are in control of all our pleasures and desires, and it gives us a thorough training in courage, so that we willingly endure all hardship. And it teaches us justice, so that whatever our different attitudes may be, we retain a sense of balance. And it instructs us in piety so that we most highly reverence the only living God. Therefore, we do not eat unclean food. Believing that God established the law, we know that the Creator of the world, in giving us the law, conforms it to our nature. He has commanded us to eat whatever will be well suited to our souls, and has forbidden us to eat food that is reverse. It is the act of a tyrant to compel us not only to transgress the law, but also to eat, so that you may laugh at us for partaking of the unclean food that is abhorrent to us. But you will not have your laugh at my expense. I will not violate the solemn oaths of my ancestors to keep the law, not even if you gouge out my eyes and burn my entrails. I am neither so old nor short of manliness that in the matter of religion my reason should not lose its youthful vigor. So set the torturer's wheel turning set the torturer's wheel turning, and fan the fire to a great blaze. I am not so sorry for my old age as to become responsible for breaking the law of my fathers. I will not play you false, O law, my teacher. I will not forswear you. Beloved self-control, I will not shame you. Philosophic reason, nor will I deny you. Venerable priesthood and knowledge of the law, you shall not defile the reverent lips of my old age, nor my lifelong service of the law. Pure shall my fathers welcome me, fearless of your punishments even until death. Tyrannize as you will over the ungodly, but you will never lord it over my thoughts on the subject of true religion, neither by your words nor through your works. Eleazar's amazing bravery under torture. 6. After Eleazar responded so eloquently to the tyrant's exhortations, then the guards who stood around dragged him roughly to the implements of torture. First they stripped off the old man's clothes, though he was still adorned with the beauty of his piety. Then binding his arms on either side, they scourged him with whips, while right up against him and herald shouted, "Obey the king's commands." But the great-souled and noble man, a true Eleazar, refused absolutely to recant, as if the torture were no more than a dream. And keeping his eyes raised aloft to heaven, the old man let his flesh be torn by the scourges until his blood ran freely and his sides were lacerated. He fell to the ground when his body could no longer endure the pain. But his reason he kept erect and inflexible. With his foot, one of the merciless guards kicked him savagely on the side to make him get up as he fell. But he suffered the torment and scorned the compulsion. But he suffered the torment and scorned the compulsions and overcame the pains. And under a hail of blows, the old man, like a true athlete, prevailed over his torturers. His face beaded with sweat and panting heavily, he roused his very torturers to amazement in his fortitude. Thereupon, partly out of pity for his old age, partly in sympathy through previous friendship, partly in admiration of his courage, some of the king's courtiers went up to him and said, "Why, Eleazar, are you so unreasonably destroying yourself in this foul way? Let us bring you some of the cooked food, and you pretend to taste of the swine's flesh and save yourself." But as if their counsel only made his wounds all the harder to bear, Eleazar cried aloud, "Never may the children of Abraham think such evil thoughts as out of cowardice to enact a part so ill becoming to us. It would most surely be contrary to reason if, having lived our lives in accordance with the truth right up to our old age, and having preserved our fair reputation for so living in conformity with the law, we should now change, and ourselves become a model of impiety to the young by setting them an example of eating unclean food. Shameful would it be if we should, with only a very short space of life left to us, become a laughingstock in the eyes of all for our cowardice, and be despised by the tyrant as craven because we would not champion our divine law to death. Therefore, O children of Abraham, you must die nobly for piety's sake. And you, guards of the tyrant, Why leave off your work? When they saw him so high in spirit, in the face of such constraints, and so adamant against their offer of mercy, they brought to him the fire. There they burned him with cunningly devised instruments, and threw him in the fire, and poured an evil-smelling concoction into his nostrils. And when his flesh had burned away to the very bones, and he was on the point of expiring, he lifted his eyes to God and said, You know, O God, that I could have saved myself. I am dying in these fiery torments for the sake of the law. Be merciful to your people, and let our this is crucial, man. I'm trying to tell you. We should all wish to be like this man, and consider ourselves lucky if we do make it. You know what I'm saying? The servant isn't greater than the master, so we all know how Christ died, and you know, if we walk true, we can expect the same in this world. So we gotta pray in these days that our hearts don't fail us. You know what I'm saying? That we can stick fast, for real. But anyways, let's get back to it. And it says at verse 27, You know, O God, that though I could have saved myself, I am dying in these fiery torments for the sake of the law. Be merciful to your people, and let our punishment be a satisfaction on their behalf. Make my blood their purification, and take my life as a ransom for theirs. With these words the holy man nobly succumbed to his torments, and by his reason held his ground through the very tortures of death for the law's sake. Confessedly then, devout reason is master of the passions. For if the passions were sovereign over reason, I would have credited them with testimony to their superiority. But since we have just shown how reason conquers the passions, we properly confer upon it the authority of leadership. It is only right that we should confess reason's sovereignty insofar as it rules over torments inflicted on us from outside ourselves. It would be absurd to do otherwise. The arguments I adduce demonstrate wisdom's actual sovereignty not only over pains, but its rule over pleasures and its complete refusal to yield to them. A panegyric on Eleazar. I have no clue what that means. 7. Like an outstanding pilot, indeed, the reason of our father Eleazar, steering the vessel of piety on the sea of passions, though buffeted by the threats of the tyrant and swamped by the swelling waves of torture, in no way swerved the rudder of piety until he sailed into the haven of deathless victory. No city beleaguered by many devices of all kinds has ever offered such resistance as did that perfect saint. When his sacred soul was assailed with blazing rack and torture, through reason, the shield of his piety, he overcame his besiegers, stretching out his mind like a protruding cliff. Our father Eleazar shattered the wild surges of his passions. O priest worthy of your priestly office, you did not defile your sacred teeth, nor did you pollute with unclean food a stomach that had room only for piety and purity. O mind in perfect unison with the law and philosopher of the divine life, so must all those be who are skilled in the craft of keeping the law and who defend it with their own blood and noble sweat, even in the face of sufferings unto death. You, Father, by endurance that brought you to glory, have confirmed our adherence to the law, and you and your august speech on holiness you have not annulled, but through your deeds you have ratified your words of divine philosophy. O aged man, mightier than torture, revered elder, more vigorous than the flame, great king, ruler of the passions, Eleazar, even as our father Aaron, armed with the censer, ran through and massed company of his people and overcame the fiery angel, so did Aaron's descent Eleazar not deviate his reason, though consumed in the fire. But most wonderful of all, though he was an old man and the sinews of his body were already unstrung, his muscles all relaxed and his nerves weakened, By means of reason he became youthful again in spirit, and by reason, like Isaac's, prevailed over many-headed torture. O blessed old age, revered gray head, life loyal to the law and perfected by the faithful seal of death. If therefore an old man despise torments unto death on account of his piety, we must admit that devout reason is leader over the passions. But some may contend that not all men are masters of the passions, because not all men possess enlightened reason. Only those who with all their heart make piety their first concern are able to conquer the passions of the flesh, believing that to God they do not die, as our patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob died not, but lived to God. Accordingly, the validity of our argument is not impaired by the fact that some men seem to be ruled by their passions because of the weakness of their reason. For what philosopher is there who lives by the whole rule of philosophy and believes in God, and knows that it is blessed to endure every pain for the sake of virtue? Who could fail to master his passions for the sake of piety? Only the wise and courageous man is ruler of the passions. The king's invitation to the 7 brothers to recant their ancestral faith. Chapter 8. Yes, indeed, even young lads have become philosophers through devout reason and have triumphed over still more severe torments. For when the tyrant had been so conspicuously foiled in his first attempt, having been unable to compel the old man to eat unclean food, then in violent rage he ordered others of the Hebrew captives to be brought, and said that if they would eat of the unclean food, they would be released. But if they refused, they would be even more savagely tortured. When the tyrant had issued these commands, 7 brothers in the company of their aged mother were brought before him, handsome and modest and well-born and altogether charming. On seeing them standing around their mother in the midst, as though they were a chorus, the tyrant was struck by them, and astounded at their comeliness and nobility. He smiled at them, and called them near, and said, Young men, I admire you each and every one, and want to show you favor. And since I greatly respect the beauty of such a large band of brothers, I not only advise you not to display the same mad frenzy that old man who has just been tortured, but I beg of you to yield to me and take advantage of my friendship. Just as I am able to punish those who disobey my orders, so am I able to benefit those who obey me. Take my word for it, then, that if thou wilt renounce the ancestral law of your polity, you will receive leading positions of authority over my domains. Share in the Greek style, change your mode of living, and enjoy your youth. If you provoke me to anger by your disobedience, you will compel me to the use of dreadful punishments to destroy each and every one of you by torture. Have pity on yourselves, for though I am your enemy, I myself feel compassion for you in your youth and beauty. Will you not reflect that if you disobey, there is nothing in store for you but death with torments? With these words he ordered the instruments of torture to be brought forward in order to terrorize them into eating the unclean food. The guards then brought forward the wheels and joint dislocators, racks and wooden horses, catapults and cauldrons, braziers and thumbscrews, iron claws and wedges and bellows. And the tyrant spoke up again and said, You must be afraid, my lads, and justice you revere. And the justice you revere will be merciful to you if you transgress under duress. But they, when they heard this enticing words and saw fearful machines of torture, not only were not frightened, but even resisted the tyrant with their own philosophy, and by their right reasoning brought down his tyranny. Just think, however, what sort of arguments they would have used if some among them had been faint-hearted and cowardly. Would they not have gone like this? What wretched and extremely foolish creatures we are, that when the king invites us and presses us to accept his benevolence, we should not consent. Why do we sport such vain resolutions and venture a disobedience that will be the death of us? Shall we not, my brothers, fear these instruments of torture? Take account of the threats of torment, and abandon this vainglory and fatal bragging. Let us take pity on our youth and have compassion to our mother's old age, and let us lay it to heart that if we disobey, we die. The divine justice will pardon us for being afraid of the king under duress. Why should we remove ourselves from this most pleasant life and deprive ourselves of this sweet world? Let us not resist necessity, nor vaunt ourselves to our own cost and torture. Not even the law itself would willingly condemn us to death for being afraid of the instruments of torture. Why should we be so absorbed in contentiousness or so attracted to an obstinacy that must prove fatal, when we could obey the king and live an untroubled life? But on the very point of being tortured, these young men uttered no such words, nor even entertained such thoughts, for they despised the emotions and were masters over pain. Accordingly, no sooner had the tyrant finished counseling them to eat unclean food than they all with one voice and as with one soul said, "Why do ye delay, tyrant? We are prepared to die rather than transgress the commandments of our forefathers. We should truly bring shame upon our ancestors if we did not live in obedience to the law and take Moses as our counselor. Tyrant, who counsel us to transgress? Do not in your hatred of us pity us more than we pity ourselves. We reckon that your clemency, which offers us deliverance in return for our transgression, is harder to bear than death itself. You seek to terrify us with your threat of death by torture, as if you had learned nothing from Eleazar but a short while ago. But if, for the sake of their religion and enduring through torments, old men of the Hebrews have remained faithful to the end, it is even more appropriate that we who are young should die in disregard of the tortures you impose on us, the very tortures our aged teacher triumphed over. But as to the test, then, tyrant, put us to the test, then, tyrant, and if you take our lives for the sake of our religion, do not think you can harm us with your torments. By our suffering and endurance we shall obtain the prize of virtue and shall be with the Most High, on whose account we suffer. But you, because of our foul murder, will suffer at the hand of divine justice the everlasting torment by fire you deserve." The torture and defiance of the first and second sons. Indignant at these words expressing the youth's disobedience, the tyrant was even more enraged at their ingratitude. Then, at the word of command, the guards brought forward the eldest brother, ripped off his tunic, and bound his hands and arms on either side with thongs. But when they had flogged him with the whips, for all their strenuous efforts had made no impression on him, they cast him on the wheel. When he was racked on it, the limbs of the noble youth were put out of joint. And as limb after limb was broken, he denounced the tyrant and said, "Most abominable tyrant, enemy of heaven's justice, and bent on slaughter, you punish me in this fashion not as a murderer or man of impiety, but as a champion of the divine law." The guards then said to him, "Consent to eat and so save yourself from the tortures." But he replied, "Your wheel is not so strong, base underlings, as to strangle my reason. Sever my limbs, burn my flesh, twist my joints, and through all these torments I will prove to you that the children of the Hebrews alone are invincible in the defense of virtue." When he said this, they spread fire under him and fed the blaze, drawing the wheel still tighter. The wheel was besmeared all over with blood, and the heap of coals was quenched. Crucial, man. This is hard to read, man. It's hard to read. Alright, where are we at? Verse 20. Chapter 9, verse 20. The wheel was besmeared all over with his blood, and the heap of coals was quenched by the discharged fluid dropping down, and bits of flesh whirled around on the axles of the machine. Even when his bodily frame was all dissevered, the great soul, the youth, a true son of Abraham, uttered not a groan, as though he were being transformed into incorruption by the fire. He nobly endured the torments and said, Imitate me, my brothers. Do not become deserters in my trial, nor for. All right, brother, give me 1 sec, man. Give me 1 sec. It's crucial. It's crucial, man. All right, where we at? Verse 23. Imitate me, my brothers. Do not become deserters in my trial, nor forswear our brotherhood and nobility. Fight the sacred and noble fight for true religion, and through it may the just providence that protected our fathers become merciful to our people, and take vengeance on the accursed tyrant. With these words the saintly youth expired. While they all marveled at his bravery of soul, the guards brought forward the brother next to him in age, and when they had adjusted the sharp-clawed iron hands, they fastened him to the torture machine and the catapult. On inquiring of him whether he was willing to eat before the torture began, they heard his noble resolve, and then proceeded to tear at his sinews with the iron hands, and ripped off all the flesh even from his cheeks and the skin of his head, like wild leopards. This agony he endured with courage, and said, "How sweet is every kind of death for the sake of our ancestral religion." And to the tyrant he said, "Does it not occur to you, most bloodthirsty of tyrants, that you are being tortured more than I? When you see that the arrogant reasoning that belongs to your tyranny is overcome by our endurance for true religion's sake, I am sustained in my ordeal by the joys that arise from defending virtue, but you are tortured by the threats that confront impiety. You cannot, vile tyrant, escape the penalties of the divine wrath." The torture and defiance of the third and fourth sons. What time is it, bro? I gotta get up early, man. The torture and defiance of the third and fourth sons. Chapter 10. When he had bravely met his illustrious death, the third son was brought forward amid fervent exhortations from many people to taste of the food and save himself. But he cried aloud and said, "Do ye not know that the very same Father begot both me and my dead brothers, and the same mother bore us all, and I was brought up on the same doctrines? I do not abjure the noble bond of brotherhood. Therefore, if you have any means of torture, apply it to my body. For my soul you cannot touch, even if you would." At the man's outspoken pronouncement, they were grievously annoyed, and with their dislocating machines they dislocated his hands and feet, and by the use of levers they sundered his limbs from their sockets, and they twisted his fingers and arms and legs and elbows, and when they could by no means strangle his spirit, they abandoned their machines, and with the tips of their fingers they scalped him as the Scythians do. Then they brought him at once to the wheel, and on its backbone was disjointed until he saw bits of his flesh and shreds, and gouts of blood pouring from his entrails. On the point of death he said, "We, vile tyrant, suffer all this for our training in divine virtue, but for your impiety and savagery you will suffer endless torments." When he had died in a manner worthy of his brothers, they dragged forward the fourth one, and said, "Do not you, too, display the same madness as your brothers, but obey the king and save yourself?" But he replied, "For me you cannot heat the fire so hot as to make a coward of me. By the blessed death of my brothers, by the everlasting ruin of the tyrant, by the glorious life of the pious, I will not deny our noble brotherhood. Contrive whatever tortures you will, tyrant, that you might go on learning from them that I am brother to those who have been tortured already." On hearing this, the bloodthirsty and murderous and altogether abominable Antiochus ordered his tongue be cut out. But he said, "Even if you remove the organ of speech, God still hears those who are silent. Look, my tongue is hanging out. Cut it off, for you will not thereby make my reason mute. Gladly, for the sake of the Most High, do we allow the limbs of our body to be mutilated. But you, God, speedily overtake, since you are cutting out the tongue that sang songs of praise to him." the torture and defiance of the 4 remaining sons. When he too, who had been so cruelly afflicted with tortures, died, the 5th son sprang forward and said, I waste no time in demanding the torture for virtue's sake, but of my own accord come forward so that you might kill me, and for your further misdeeds incur the punishment the heavenly justice will inflict on you. You enemy of virtue and enemy of man, what have we done that you destroy us in this way? Is it because we revere the Creator of all and live according to his virtuous law? But such conduct deserves honors, not torments. While he spoke these words, the guards bound him and dragged him to the catapult. They bound him to it by his knees, and fastening them to it with iron cramps, they twisted his loins back over the circular wedge until he was curled back on the wheel like a scorpion, and his limbs were all disjointed. And thus, struggling for breath and racked in body, he said, A glorious favor you bestow on us, tyrant, though all unwilling, enabling us as you are to manifest our constancy toward the law by yet more noble sufferings. When he had died, the 6th son was brought forward, a mere lad. The tyrant then asked if he was willing to eat and be released, but he replied, I am younger in age than my brothers, but just as old in reason. We were born and reared for the same purpose. We are likewise obliged to die in the same cause. Accordingly, if you want to torture me for not eating unclean food, do your torturing now. When he said this, they brought him to the wheel, and stretching him out on it carefully until his backbone was disjointed, they set the fire going under him, and heating up sharp skewers, they ran them into his back, and piercing his sides, they burned out his entrails. But under all this torment, he declared, How sacred and seemly is the agony to which so many of my brothers and I have been summoned, as to a contest in sufferings for piety's sake, and yet we have not been vanquished. For religious knowledge, tyrant is unconquerable. Fully armed with goodness, I too shall die alone with my brothers, and I myself too shall confront you with one great avenger more, you deviser of new tortures, you enemy of men of true religion. 6 of us, lads though we are, have destroyed your tyranny, for your inability to sway our reason or to force us to eat unclean food. Is not that your ruin? Your fire is cool for us, and your catapults painless, and your violence powerless. No tyrant's guards, but the guardians of the divine law, have been our protectors, and that is why our reason remains undefeated. When he too had died and blessed death, having been cast into the cauldron, the 7th and youngest son of all came forward, moved with pity toward him, even though he had been fiercely exasperated by his brothers, and seeing the bonds already placed on him. The tyrant asked him to come closer and attempted to persuade him, saying, You see the outcome of your brother's folly. They have been duly punished for their disobedience and are dead, and you too, if you refuse to obey, will be miserably tortured and will yourself meet a premature death. But if you do obey, you will be my friend and will be given charge over my affairs of state. While he thus appealed to him, he sent for the boy's mother, so that he might show pity to her over the loss of so many sons, and further urge on the sole surviving son the obedience that would save him. But when the mother gave encouragement to her son in the Hebrew tongue, as we shall shortly relate, Loose me, he said, and let me speak to the king and all the friends who are with him. And in great glee over the boy's promise, they quickly loosed him. Then he ran to the nearest brazier and said, Impious man, of all the wicked ones, you most ungodly tyrant, are you not ashamed to receive your kingdom with all its blessings from the hand of God, and then to kill those who serve him and torture those who practice piety? In return for this, Justice will hold you in store for a fiercer and an everlasting fire, and for torments which will never let you go for all time. Are not you who are but a man ashamed, you savage beast, to cut out the tongues of men who share the same feelings as you and are made of the same elements, and to torture them in this brutal fashion? They, for their part, have died nobly, and so fulfilled their piety toward the Most High. But you will groan dreadfully for having slain the champions of virtue without cause. Then when he too was on point of death, he declared, I shall not prove deserter to my brother's valor. I call upon the Most High power of my fathers to be merciful to our people. You he will punish both in the present life and in death. With this prayer against the tyrant, he threw himself into the braziers and so gave up his life. Alright, I'm going to stop it right there. I'll pick it back up tomorrow. But, I just want to say peace to y'all, and hope y'all have a good day tomorrow. And, that the week bring many blessings for you all. And, hope the Most High prospers his work and your own in your hands, Bless him. Don't stop doing it, While we got breath in our lungs, keep blessing him and his blessed Son, the Christ Yeshua, right? In the name and in the Holy Spirit, which gives us wisdom and understanding and courage and the reason to do as these brothers did, right? And we hope that we could do the same in our life and not, go backwards, right? But anyways, peace and strength and blessings be with you all, right? In Christ Yeshua's name. Later. I'll catch y'all tomorrow night. Shalom, brother. Take care of yourself, all right? Have a good one tomorrow. Later, bro.